And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another weekly review with The Robot, brought to you by the Movie Pope. And here he is, bolts and nuts akimbo, The Robot.
No doubt you guys have heard the news by now, and it's downright tragic. Rob Reiner's passing came as a shock, and even now, we're still trying to process what happened. It's mind-numbing, really, but here at the channel, we're not delving into the ins and outs of this case. It would be in poor taste. We just review movies. It's what we do around here, and what better way to honor their endeavors than discussing the body of work into which they poured their blood, sweat, and tears, telling stories that make us shake our fists in rage, pretend we're not crying, and laughing as if we haven't laughed in a long time. And to honor Robbie's life and career, we'll be looking at a classic that is known in the mainstream and yet Indian spirit. 1984's This Is Spinal Tap. Reiner was building on the work that Eric Idle did with All You Need Is Cash, the mockumentary satirizing the Beatles. But rather than poking fun at one particular band, he instead went after a genre and all its foibles and follies. Following a fictional British metal band on its American tour and seeing it's not all wine and roses, we're treated to something that is so ridiculous in its execution that it can't possibly be real, thus giving rise to the tagline, "Any that can go wrong does go wrong." These guys definitely get the short end of the stick in promoting their album and trying to stay relevant in an ever-changing scene. So, let's see what makes This Is Spinal Tap so great and remember the genius of Rob Reiner. Spinal Tap was one of those bands filled with dimwits who couldn't turn on the lights without incident. They're vain, shallow, self-absorbed, possessive, and naive. They're essentially children. But just like children, we love them in spite of their tremendous flaws. David St. Hubbins and Nigel Tufnel, the two architects of this band, parody the metal bands that were prevalent in the 1980s, complete with big hair and disturbingly tight pants. And, like kids, they do love their toys, which in this case are the ludicrous amount of guitars and amps, which makes poor Nigel a bit touchy at one point. The rock and roll lifestyle has been glamorized by the axiom sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the only things that any musician needs in order to be great. Sure, they do tone it down. We don't see anyone snorting dead people's ashes or banging in a church or driving a Rolls Royce into a pool. We just see guys going on tour and trying to make a living doing what they love. The genius is that it pulls the curtain back and instead shows us that, behind all that bravado and showmanship, the guys in the band are just as ordinary as the guy you might see in a hardware store. Of course, they do their best to maintain the illusion, but it soon deflates, especially the exaggerated cod pieces. Derek definitely deflates that myth when he reveals he's carrying a cucumber in his pants. And no, it's not a euphemism. When you excise the fluff and banality, you get a band filled with musicians who know their craft very well, and isn't at the core of rock, anyway. We tend to see Spinal Tap as just a mockumentary satirizing the 80s music scene, which is a totally fair assessment. But it's a bromance, as well, between the lifelong friends who wanted to make music together. David St. Hubbins, as the lead singer, takes center stage, belting out tunes that may not necessarily fly in 2025, but are so melodic and comedic you can be forgiven. Nigel Tufnel, his best mate, is the lead guitarist who is self-effacing. He just hangs out in the back and lets his guitar skills do the talking. David definitely dominates, but there isn't any resentment from Nigel whatsoever. Even when David lets Janine take over and start running the band, Nigel deep down still cares and comes back to jam with him. In watching this, it calls to mind the myth that Yoko broke up the Beatles, and this was Rob's way of telling a similar story, but the band soldiered on rather than calling it quits. It speaks to the deep bond they share, and no one, not Janine or even Ian, could shatter it. Because at the end of the day, after rotating through short-term drummers, even through all the ups and downs of the business, and having to deal with management, all they had was each other. No homo, by the way. You can tell that deep down these two care about one another and share a brotherly bond that the other members don't share on the same footing. Not sure why decided to dress like one another, though that seems a bit of a stretch. But hey, if you and your bro are tight, you manifest that love in your own unique way. While this movie taps the ridiculousness to 11, you can sometimes think that the parody is just that tall parody. But the minuscule Stonehenge, getting lost backstage, and the disturbing turnover of drummers, all are true. Messing up the scale of Stonehenge was based on what happened to Ozzy Osbourne, except in this case it was too big rather than being minuscule. And the pretentiousness of Spinal Tap poked fun at how bands and musicians took themselves too seriously, in an Inspector Clouseau kind of way, to the point that they clown themselves better than any stand-up comic. Rob Reiner definitely held a mirror to the industry and found material that hadn't been tapped previously, giving us memorable moments in a movie that was inspired by real life and simultaneously inspired real life. The Black Album by Metallica. Definitely a nod to the amended cover for Smell the Glove, and even the Canadian rock band Anvil ran into plenty of mishaps that earned them the moniker the real Spinal Tap, which is a bit of a dubious honor. But what about the ordinary audience member? Surely there's no way we can relate to these fellows. True, we're not touring and shredding guitar night after night, or even having a record deal, but we can all relate to dealing with the ups and downs of everyday life. We can relate to Nigel getting sidelined by his friend David when he lets his squeeze call the shots and wonder if the friendship is over. Seriously, how often do we roll our eyes at someone who thinks themselves more important than they really are? Sometimes we just want to do what we love, whether it's music, acting, or doing a podcast, without any extra fluff that complicates things and ruins what would otherwise be a fun endeavor. So, yeah, we can all relate to it. This is Spinal Tap is one of those movies you don't see blasted in ad campaigns that cost millions to produce across all media. It's not flashy or sexy or anything like that, though it can come off that way. It's a movie of the people, so it only makes sense that you know of this movie from other people. And when you watch it the first time around, you aren't necessarily sold on the idea, but somehow it draws you in. And you watch it and rewatch it, you begin to find elements that elicit a chuckle out of you, and before long you know all the beats. You've become a fan without even realizing it, and that's the genius of Rob Reiner. A man who made millions laugh and cry still had so much to give, even at a spry 78, which is really only 48 when you look at it. Legends like Robert Redford and Diane Keaton went to their reward knowing they gave everything they could and could rest in the solace that their legacy is complete. They didn't need to do anything else. Reiner, however, had a lot more in the tank, and after what happened, we'll never know what else could have been, what other projects we could have been treated to. But what we do have is the summation of a man who wasn't solely a comedian or liked dramas. This was someone who understood human nature and knew just what buttons to push to get a reaction from not only the characters on screen but us watching in the gallery. So, my friends, if you've got the time, if you've got 2 hours to spare, why not knock back with one of his classics? Rather than obsess on how he died, let's celebrate a wonderful life he's had and how he enlivened ours. Let's raise a toast. Robbie, we love you and we will miss you. Rest in peace, brother.